okay, if you are a young person in the West, like a millennial, Zoomer, that age range, I think most of us have noticed that things aren't really looking that great. Like something feels off. It's not working out anymore, like in those glorious boomer days where you can stumble over your feet a couple of times and end up a millionaire with a good pension. And what I'm about to talk is mostly about the United States and the empire of the United States, but I think it is true for most Western countries. At least most of the points are applicable to all of the West. And obviously, I'm not the only one who has been thinking about this, and you can see both from the political, like left liberal those circles. They call it capitalism or just late stage capitalism, and more on the right side, I think they just call it globalism. But I think both of these words or definitions are kind of lacking. I think what we are going through is simply empire. It's There's no other way to really describe it. The consequences of empire, of having an empire, of living in an empire. And of course, the famous moderate liberal centrist once said that the highest form of capitalism is imperialism. So, like the first symptom of having an empire is actually mass immigration. Obviously, from all of the wealth and glory of an empire, you have like a big pull factor for immigrants. So, a lot of people want to come into the empire to profit themselves off of it. And then you have, of course, the ruling class that is always in search for cheap labor to maximize their profits. And a desperate migrant will do any job for much cheaper than a native worker would. This is not really anything new. Like in the Roman Empire, they imported a bunch of slaves to do the jobs that the native Romans would have done at a much higher price. A similar phenomenon is outsourcing, where a lot of the Western industrial production has been transferred to China and other economies because, of course, they have cheaper labor. So if your goal is simply to maximize profits, it seems beneficial to you. I'm gonna produce at some other place where I can get cheaper consumer products, even if it's gonna be detrimental for the local population that are then out of jobs, obviously. And you can clearly see with mass immigration, immediately the working class gets hurt because they have more competition, their wages go down, and usually they are the ones who have to live with the new migrants that are not really accustomed to the culture and the rules of behavior in the imperial country. Initially, the middle class profits, like think of the classic example of like a professional living in the suburbs with his family who can get like a cheap Mexican gardener. And that works for a while and it gives an incentive to the middle and upper class to join up together to fight against the interests of the working class. But eventually, the middle class gets hurt as well. Like, think of the H-1B visas, all the cheap Indian coders. Like, those are generally white collar, middle class jobs, being a software engineer, whatever. And lo and behold, they find ways to outsource them or to import cheap immigrants to do those jobs as well. So the short-term benefits for the middle class are actually leading to long-term detrimental effects. And to be honest, I don't think the upper class, the elites, are really immune to the downsides. Eventually, they are going to get partially replaced as well, but it might take generations, and I don't think they see it coming, and I don't think they care, to be honest. A quick comment about the elites. They obviously see themselves as very like a cosmopolitan, international. Like, think for example about Elon Musk, who I think has British heritage. He was born in South Africa and now he lives in the United States. I don't think he really has an allegiance to any country. He has no allegiance to anything other than himself and, well, making as much money as he can, probably. And the middle class always seeks to imitate the elites because they're low-key jealous and they therefore want to like live this cosmopolitan lifestyle. So that's also like a reason why they support immigration so much, even though it's probably not in their interest. Another thing is the economic and the financial situation. So obviously in an empire you can harness a lot of resources from the territories you control. especially in the situation of the United States. They have the petrodollar, which basically states that countries must buy oil in dollar. Pretty much every country needs oil, so the dollar is always going to be valuable as long as this system is being held up. And yeah, this basically means that the United States can like print as much money or go into as much debt as possible. They are the ones who generate the dollars that are intrinsically valuable as long as the system is being upheld. And it is being upheld by the United States military ultimately. I'm gonna come back to this point with the military later because this is really important. But we have established that the United States has a lot of cheap money, like almost infinite. You can see they don't even care anymore. They will just rack up debts. They don't give a flying fuck, you know? And this is actually very, very bad for an economy. Like all this cheap money, it leads to speculation. It leads to the misallocation of capital. You can, I think, see this very much with the AI bubble. Instead of, you know, investing the money in something that makes sense, like a industry that might be future relevant, people just speculate it away into like the new current thing. Like, oh, it's gonna be the AI is gonna be the future. Let's put money in there, or maybe even crypto. To be honest, you know. So you can kind of see how this leads to financialization and a deindustrialization of the economy. You move away from the things that really matter, and you move just to financial speculation. And yeah, we can see that in the search of the highest return on investment, the highest profits, the elites basically turn to rent extraction and to like rent-seeking behaviors instead of investing into industries that might be or would be very useful for the nation. They just look for the highest profits, even if that is well quite detrimental or damaging to the country. The next thing we can observe is a dilution of identity. Obviously, as the empire grows and integrates more and more new people, especially people who are very, very different from the founding stock of the empire, like immigrants that are not even just like not British or not European, like from the other side of the world, you know. The identity that made the empire in the first place is getting more and more diluted. Like if you look into some of the founding fathers of the United States, they were all like very, very influenced by like the Enlightenment and British liberalism, all that jazz. And that already got a bit diluted when, well, they got like a bunch of German immigrants, they got like Italian immigrants, they got Italian immigrants that were Catholics instead of the Protestants that founded the United States, you know, like the WASP, the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. And obviously now with a lot more like Hispanic, Latino, Indian immigration, the American identity becomes even more diluted and people start saying like, oh, being American, it's just an idea. Like all you have to believe in is like capitalism and the American dream, and you can be American. And I think once you dilute an identity to such a degree, like if everyone can be or if everyone is American, then no one is American. Like it doesn't even mean anything anymore. So I don't think it's surprising that we are seeing a lot of new identities form. We are seeing a lot of like identity politics, culture wars, blah blah blah. You know the jazz. Because the American identity has basically become like worthless, and people would rather identify with something else. Like yeah, people are looking for more restrictive identities. Like oh, I'm not American. I'm white, or I'm black. I'm gay. I'm straight. I'm trans. I'm identified by the Marvel movies I consume. You know. And of course, like this identity politics, culture war stuff is stoked by the elite. It's very, very useful to them. Like, oh, divide and conquer. You keep the plebs fighting amongst each other, so they can't really fight against you, and you can basically do what you want. I think this is a topic for another video, like the conflict between the rural nativist population that are more traditional and then the cosmopolitan elite. But I think all of this is to a large degree caused by empire and imperialism. Oh yeah, let's get back to what I mentioned before about the military. Like the US needs a large military to project power, to keep the system of the petrodollar going. And this leads to a situation where the military becomes more and more important and more the central focus of the empire. And eventually, I think the military becomes the only reason why the empire exists and the only reason for which the empire exists. It's like a almost circular logic. The empire exists to keep the military going, and the military keeps going to keep the empire going. You can clearly see in ancient Rome that they eventually reached a point where all of the other imperial institutions were basically completely broken, they didn't work anymore. And literally, the only thing still working was the military, which was at that point just an extractive force. Like, more and more resources got being taken by the subjects of the empire to keep the military going. And I think this also gives us a clue of how the American Empire will end. Because if you look at the Roman Empire, they eventually were overextended. They just couldn't control certain provinces anymore. They were like barbarian incursions, like other peoples challenging their power, and the military, despite all the resources, couldn't hack it anymore. They couldn't do it anymore. And this led to eventually provinces being abandoned, the military retreating, zones of control were being lost, and step by step the actual influence of the Roman Empire just shrank more and more back to the capital, to the like nexus and the main zone of imperial power. Like they abandoned Britain. Just one day they were there, and the next day they were gone, and Britain was left to fend for itself. And I think we're already seeing some of this in the American Empire, with Trump talking about like retreating from Europe and letting go of their military bases, stuff like that. So I think this is a hint that the American Empire is already overextended, and some of the, not provinces, but some of the territories it influences that are not officially part of the US but are basically vassal states. I think some of these areas the US wants to give up and retreat from. So then the ultimate end game is that imperial power will shrink more and more and more, and eventually they will have to retreat not just from the vassals and the allies, but maybe from their own territory. And you could see, like you could imagine a scenario where the United States basically balkanizes. Already there are big differences between like what California, New York, the Deep South, Appalachia, what's the part up north called, Washington State, stuff like that. You know, these are very culturally already quite different regions. You could see once imperial power has sufficiently diminished, these regions will just break off and form their own states. I mean, this is kind of for the distant future, like probably not in the next 50 to 100 years, but I think that will be the eventual end of the United States. And yeah, this is my explanation of what is currently going on in the United States and the West and where I think it's going. And unfortunately, I don't think there's any like good solution to fix it. Like, I think Trump is already an expression of some like nativist rebellion. He seems to realize or think that the US is overextended and he wants to consolidate and like take a step back. Who knows if he'll succeed with that really, because there's always gonna be resistance by the elites. They don't really, like the elites don't really understand the gravity of the situation. They will always refuse to accept that they are overextended in any way, and they will want to keep everything going, if not expanding. Ultimately, you can retreat to pause the decline. You can have, even during the big arc of decline, you can have short periods where living standards are actually improving again and things are looking like they're on the up and up again. But I don't think the larger historical trend, you can really escape from that. I guess the only thing that remains for a humble subject of the American Empire is try to get away from the big cities, move into the woods, and pay as little taxes as possible. That's about all for this video. Let me know in the comments, are you American, European? Are you posting your comment straight out of Tel Aviv? And yeah, that's it. Always remember to I forgot.